Two Rivers Talks is brought to you by Two Rivers Biz Starts. Also by Two Rivers Main Street. And by Raleigh Point Economic Advising. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
This segment of episode 20 will be a standalone episode, so we'll be able to get the whole thing about Paragon out to the public a lot quicker that way.
Yeah, I'm glad I came soaking wet.
I know.
Ready for the interview.
And now it's sunny
now the
outside.
sun's shining.
But anyway, we have our Two Rivers City Manager Greg Buckley here with us. Thank you very much for coming.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
And it'll give us an opportunity to talk about the sale of Paragon and where we are as a city as far as what the next steps are going to be.
Sure.
And kind of dispel some of the rumors that had
Maybe
cropped
create
up.
some new ones, but no, we'll try.
Oh, we probably will,
Yeah.
Inadvertently.
Yeah.
But, this has been going on. Well, Paragon closed back in 1999.
Correct.
And 2013, I know, is when Dan Wergen and Joe
Roberts
Jr. got together and formed a partnership. 2014 is when things really started going.
It's when the loans were made, the proposed business was
Right.
announced, the loans were made,
Right.
and they took ownership of the building.
Right.
Yep.
So this has been going on a while, and it's nice to see, even though it's been a brutal process, it's been an ugly process. And when I was on city council, I came off of city council back in April of this year. I'd been on for 3 years, and this had been on the radar that entire time.
Continuously for 3 years.
Wow. Plus, before my time. And so it's nice to see it finally come to a head.
Yes.
But my first question for you, Mr. Buckley, can I call you Greg?
Yes, you may.
Okay.
Ms. Leclerc.
You can call me Darla. Just don't call me late for dinner. Okay, that was bad. Where are you originally from?
I grew up in northern Maine in a small town called Brownville. It's about 40 miles north of Bangor, as we say out there.
Oh, you sure talk funny.
Yeah. About 40 miles south of Baxter Park, which is where Mount Katahdin at the end of the Appalachian Trail is, and 40 miles north of Bangor. Yeah. In a beautiful, beautiful little town of about 1,200 people in a county of under 17,000 people that is about the size of Connecticut.
Oh my gosh.
So very rural, a lot of moose, a lot of bear, and beautiful night skies without a whole lot of light interrupting. It's a truly beautiful place.
Now I know
with
that's
long winters.
With long winters.
Yeah.
Now I know that's Maine speak.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden it's like I want to vote for JFK.
Yeah. So do I.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting too that we just bear in mind the history of the Paragon building. Of course, Paragon had its birth here in Two Rivers, wildly successful company, was saved by local owners from a proposed buyout back in the 80s, stuck around for quite a while, ultimately was acquired by CB PLC, later in a company called, that company became part of Invensys, which is a British conglomerate.
Right.
Shut down operations in Two Rivers in 1999. But prior to that, I want to say about 1993, the parent company had sold the real estate, sold the 27 acres and the 340,000 square foot plant and office on a sale leaseback. Sold a property that at least was assessed at $4 million for $14 million. Leased it back for 20 years. Sounds a little to me like some highfalutin form of borrowing in the form of a capital lease. So at the time the plant shut down, the company that did the manufacturing there didn't own it. It was owned by an investor group, and I believe over the 20-year term of the lease, the paper was held by 3 different groups. And as the lease was coming to an end, well, first of all, during that time, while there were efforts by the company to market space, it was really on a sublease because Paragon or Invensys or CB was on the hook for the lease payments related to the sale leaseback. So they had a full-time maintenance person there that I think most people in town know. He's kind of like Two Rivers' version of the Maytag repairman. rambling around in that old plant, but keeping it in good condition. As things got close to the end of the lease in about 2013, the then owners, a group called Lake Bluff Associates out of the North Chicago suburbs around Lake Bluff, conveyed the property to a Jewish school in Skokie.
Right.
And I assume there was perhaps, I don't know, but assume there might have been a charitable donation benefit, tax benefit there. And so then we dealt with Rabbi Wolf, who was in charge of that institution. They had it on the market, and that was the party that sold it to Mr. Oregon. So you've got a facility that, other than some, I think, short-term rentals for storage, has sat idle now for fully 20 years.
Right.
And that's the shame of it. Of course, in 2014, Paragon Partners, LLC, the group with Dan Morgan and Joe Roberts Jr. as principals, purchased the building. They proposed to open a bottling plant there. They did have what appeared to be some solid prospects to purchase the product that would be produced there, various specialty drinks as well as bottled water. And that was pretty exciting. Someone looking to make use of the facility. They were projecting 300 jobs would be created, and a big water user, which is something that Two Rivers truly needs. We have great quality water with our ultrafiltration plant, but as everybody knows from looking at their water bill, we could use someone other than residential property owners paying the bill.
Right.
So that was very exciting, and the state of Wisconsin was at the table talking with the company and with the prospects. The initial financing and our loan closed, the city loan closed in June of 2014, a little over 5 years ago now, was for the purchase of the building. And the city loaned $750,000 from our Economic Development Revolving Loan Fund. The county loaned $250,000. There was $1.15 million in private bank financing. The city and the county had and continue to have a joint first mortgage on the property. And the principals in the LLC, Dan Workin and his wife Carol, as well as Joseph Roberts, were co-makers of the loan, which our attorney could explain better than I can, but I'm told is even from a lender's perspective, is better than co-signers. They were co-makers of the loan and therefore equally responsible with the LLC for seeing the payments were made. Of course, the rest of the story is after a couple of years, the jobs still hadn't been created. The taxes were not getting paid, which was a condition of default under the loan agreement. And at a point in time, payments to the city and the county stopped. So the city and the county worked together quite well, I think. Our city attorney, Jack Bruce, took the lead as far as filing with the circuit court seeking a judgment against Paragon Partners LLC and the individuals who were co-makers, and seeking a foreclosure judgment in order to recover the city and the county's interests. That's what brings us to today. Manitowoc County Circuit Court Judge Mark Rohr approved the judgment and the foreclosure judgment as well in October of last year. There was a 6-month redemption period during which the property owners could recoup or recover their interest by paying what was due. That period lapsed in April with no activity, no payment. The city then proceeded in coordination with the county to pursue a date for a sheriff's sale, and that's literally not on the steps of the courthouse, but in a room at the courthouse where a representative of the sheriff's department takes bids. And if the highest bid received at a sheriff's sale is ultimately approved and the sale awarded by the court, then that party not only owns the property, but it extinguishes the other subordinate mortgages. And there are 2 other mortgages behind the city and the county on this property. I should add, I don't presume to be an attorney on this, so I'm giving you my best layman's description of it. I may get some of the terms a little bit wrong. But there were, so initially we were going to have a sheriff's sale in May. That was canceled. A subsequent date in June was canceled due to some legal machinations by one of the subordinate lien holders. Ultimately, though, we did go to sheriff's sale last week, Tuesday, August 20th. The city and the county entered a bid of $705,100. There were no other bids entered sheriff's sale closed. This week, our city attorney is filing with the circuit court seeking an award of the foreclosure sale for that amount. Understand, neither the city nor the county had to put down a check at the sale, as other bidders would have had to, because that dollar amount bid, $705,100, is less than the amount of the judgment that was awarded back in October, which I'm going from memory, but that was on the order of $1 million. There's over $1.2 million owed to the two entities when you add in not just principal, but interest, utility payments the city has paid for 2 years now to keep electricity to the building, gas bills that the city out of its development funds has paid over the past 2 years to at least keep a modest amount of heat in the building. So it's in round numbers about $1.2 million due to the two entities, in addition to about $185,000, I believe, in delinquent property taxes, 3 years of delinquent property taxes. So the goal, of course, in the whole process, I think can be summed up in two things. Number one, to recoup the public monies invested in this project. And secondly, to see after 2 decades that property, very significant property here in our community, return to some productive use.
Absolutely.
And I can tell you, we're going to be touring the building later today. I haven't been in there since spring, but that building has deteriorated a lot during the 5-year ownership and due to the absolute neglect that has taken place. But that said, I'm no engineer either, but the newer production area that was built, I believe, in 1987.
That was Department 31, which is where I happen to be.
About 110,000 square feet, high bay, nice building.
It was gorgeous.
Last time I was in there, it was still in decent shape, as were the very dated, kind of from that 70s show now, but still intact offices on the side toward Memorial Drive. That newest manufacturing area is about 110,000 square feet, the office about 28. I wouldn't dare venture at this point as to the salvageability of the areas to the north, because there's been significant water leaking in there over the last 2 winters. Risers to different parts of the sprinkler system have burst. Understand, it sounds great if you're in a first mortgage position. The city did not have and still does not have possession nor control of the property. That would only happen if and when the foreclosure sale is awarded to the city and county.
And when do you anticipate that?
There is a court date. There's a date on Judge Rohr's calendar for September 10.
Okay.
So we'll see on that.
And I know some of these things we'll touch on again as far as, well, one thing I wanted to say is that I Googled it just to see what headlines came up over time. Chronologically, back in May of 2014, the Washington Times had a headline of "Businessman Wants Bottling Plant in Two Rivers." It was the following month that the HTR came out with a headline in an article saying "Former Paragon Building Purchase Completed." And then you kind of go down 2016, 2017, all of a sudden bottling plant plans flop at former Paragon site. So you can see this progression.
Not happening.
Right.
Yep.
And finally, of course, the August 2019 HTR headline, City of Two Rivers, Manitowoc County, win the auction to acquire the former Paragon property. And I was delighted and doing a happy dance when I saw that.
Yeah, you know, at least it's still a pretty daunting prospect, but at least it'd be a significant change if indeed possession, control, the ability to sell it, pursue redevelopment can get passed to a public entity. You know, it's about the dollars, and I don't think the city, and I won't speak for the county, but I don't think the city presumes for a minute to want to let anyone off the hook who owes money and has defaulted. The bigger issue still for our community, though, is seeing productive use of that site.
Yeah, it's hard. I live near that property, and kind of looking out at it, I mean, it's just hard to see that it's not productively used.
Paragon in its heyday, and Darla, you worked there, I know, employed about 1,200 people. I think there were about 400 employees at the time they announced the plant closure and moved to Mexico. For people that might be new to the community or born since Paragon shut down, I mean, their primary product, as I understand it, was electromechanical and some electronic relays for refrigeration, primarily home refrigerators. If you've got a
For timers.
refrigerator freezer with an automatic
Yeah.
defrost cycle,
Mhm.
that's the key control that makes
Right.
the defrost cycle happen. Mass produced for some of the major appliance manufacturers. I know there were some other more specialized things.
I remember doing it was a sun tracker
Ah,
type thing for a timer for like your outdoor lights.
Hmm.
So I mean, there was a lot of different things that were going
Mhm.
on.
another case where somebody who was in Two Rivers, was it George Platt that was the founder? Platt, anyway.
Platt Park?
Came up with a brilliant invention, turned it into a thriving company, and did some amazing things.
Mhm.
Then it got bought by a big multinational
Right.
company who pulled the plug on it, and you run into that story in communities all over our part of the country. But people remember what a wonderful company, what a wonderful employer that
Well,
was.
and they were,
Yeah.
but some of the things that I think, especially our viewers, because this is a very raw subject for our viewers, because the people who have lived here and especially the people who had jobs there, just it breaks your heart to see the downward spiral of what has happened to Paragon. But back in 2014, as per Dan Wergen, initially there was, and he made the announcement. The city never made announcements.
Right. The
As
announcements about number of
speculative,
jobs and
Right.
that sort of thing.
That was never something that the city did. But Dan Wergen, he said that initially they were going to have 2 production lines, eventually going as high as 5, and employ about 100 people at a minimum of $15 per hour.
Yeah.
That was the original pronouncement.
They had hired a personnel director, were
Right.
taking applications. We've heard, about
Right.
the 300 applications that were received. I fully expect those people have all found gainful employment elsewhere.
And actually, it was over 600.
Over 600. So it was 300 positions they were looking to create.
Right.
Okay,
But
thank you.
because he had stated that also once up and running, 400 or more jobs on top of that initial 100 could be created over time. So all of a sudden, and actually they started receiving, they received over 600 applications, and this is even before there was a jobs posting.
Hmm.
And it was all within like a 6-month period. But it was all based on pronouncements and press releases. And I just know that the level of excitement
Oh, sure.
in this community was tremendous, and the optimism. And then over time that eroded, because nothing was really happening, and it left a very bitter taste in people's mouths.
And not to defend anything, but you do have a businessman with Mr. Wergen who's had a track record of some success. I
Right.
understand he was integral in bringing what was Tower Tech, now Broadwind, to the area. That continues to be a valued employee, and we all are kind of amazed when we see those big tower segments going out. And, again, the city and the state had meetings with the principals and with some of the folks that they were proposing to do business with. It was for real, I honestly believe, and it was exciting. Bottom line, it didn't happen.
Right.
And there have been discussions about different plans B, which haven't transpired. So that's where we are today. It might be good for your viewers too to know, you hear a lot about the city's economic development revolving loan fund and the county's fund. Not to go into a big history lesson, but the origins of those dollars. In the case of Two Rivers, the city in the 1980s got 2 community development block grants from the state of Wisconsin to help retain local businesses. One, I'm going to get my years wrong, I think one was in 83 or 85 for Paragon Electric, $750,000, and that assisted with the local management buyout at the time that saved Paragon here in Two Rivers. The other grant came a little later in the 80s, and that was to Eggers Industries when they repurposed a former Muro building into what became the Eggers West plant. Of course, Eggers has now vacated that. It's owned by a local investor used for some warehousing, a little bit of manufacturing. So grants for $750,000 and $500,000 that were loaned to those 2 local industries, Paragon and Eggers. And as the principal and interest on those loans was repaid to the city had permission from the state of Wisconsin to keep the funds to use and use them to capitalize a local revolving loan fund. Over the years, from the mid-'80s to today, the balance in that fund grew from $1.25 million to $2.7 million,
Right.
including this very big receivable that's the discussion,
Right.
topic of our discussion today. Actually, the city in that fund right now has about 1.5 million in cash and 1.2 million in receivables. The two biggest ones are non-performing loans right now.
Right.
One to Paragon Partners, and then the second being for the former Schwartz deli restaurant
Right.
here on Main Street. So we're pursuing both of those. Along the way, the city made over 100 loans, and prior to this big one that has been a big hiccup, the overall loss rate was about 6%, which I'm told is pretty good compared to
Right.
private sector lending even. Over 100 loans were made. The loan balance, cash and receivables grew from $1.25 million to $2.7 million. I would argue overall the city, with our Business Industrial Development Committee and staff, have been good stewards of those funds. This particular loan was made again at the point where it was the real estate purchase. The reason the city and the county, at least, were in first position and remained there is we have a loan agreement that provided the city and county would only subordinate their interest when certain amounts of additional private financing were required for building renovation and for machinery and equipment to
Right.
equip the
And
facility.
that was about $1 million for the building renovation.
$1 million for the building
and
renovation. Yep.
18 mil for equipment. And can I play devil's advocate here?
Yep.
And just kick me if.
I'm wound up and ready.
Okay.
Yeah.
So back in 2014, they got 750,000 from the city.
Yep.
And 250 from the county. And 1.15 million that was in monies that they secured independently.
So a bank loan, my
Right.
understanding it was secured by other assets because
Okay.
the bank never had a mortgage
Okay.
on this property.
But that was something where they had to foot the bill,
Right.
and they were able to
Right.
do that.
And I think as the committee and the city and the county looked at it, it sounded good at the time. It was a very exciting business prospect. There was still financing needed for the machinery and equipment for
Right.
some of the building renovation. But darn it all, 5 years ago, the building was still in good shape.
Right.
City and county were in a first mortgage position, and still are, and had the personal commitments as co-makers of the principals, as we still do. So, yeah, it seemed, while maybe there were pieces that still needed to be completed as far as the build out and the machinery and equipment, it was a decent, significant piece of real estate with the public entities in a first position on the collateral. As it turns out, I can tell you that's less than optimal after 5 years
Right.
of what has transpired.
Right.
The other kind of PS on the city's loan fund is, and you know this from being on the committee, all through the years of operating that loan fund, 30 plus years, right, until earlier this year, all of the federal requirements that went along with those original grants continued. Companies that got loans had to create or retain X number of jobs. I think it was one job for every $25,000 was our most recent criteria. They had to be able to demonstrate that a majority of the jobs went to people from low to moderate income households. So as the Fed started pushing those regulations harder,
Right.
companies had to have surveys filled out, not just by the people they hired, but by every applicant. We were even told at times that, well, if you pledged 20 new jobs, and at least 50% of them, 51% had to be low to moderate income, say 11. If you end up hiring 30 new people and only 14 are low to moderate income, you've still violated the terms.
Right.
It became increasingly difficult, especially in a generally low interest rate climate, to move those monies. That's why we've happily still got about $1.5 million
Right.
in cash. The interesting thing with the Two Rivers Loan Fund, which is still a significant resource for the community, is that it has now been defederalized. The state of Wisconsin started a process in 2018 where they said, so approximately 100 local units, cities, villages, counties that had these local RLFs funded with CDBG dollars, still with the federal regs attached. We're going to get you out of the loan business, folks. We don't, as a state, don't want to be overseeing this. You can turn your cash back into the state and apply to use it for other block grant eligible activities, like tearing down blighted buildings, like rebuilding infrastructure in low to moderate income neighborhoods. We don't have, I'm paraphrasing, but we don't have the capacity, we don't have the desire to try to oversee 100 different little loan funds. So we were preparing for that, and Darla and the BIDC, our Business Industrial Development Committee, were gearing up, talking, well, how can we redeploy those dollars in Two Rivers? Then during a teleconference or a conference call with the Department of Administration folks at the state, in the summer of 2018, it was announced that there is, I don't know the right term here, but a HUD guidance memo or regulation that says if your grant dollars are pre-1992, you're defederalized. You can go buy a fire truck with them. You can put them in your fund balance. They certify to the state that you got the dollars pre-1992. I thought they kind of know that, but we had the documentation. Submitted it, and the dollars are defederalized. I think to the credit of our city council in recognizing the needs that are in our community, the council has affirmed that they want to keep those dollars in use for economic development. And you've been to more than one meeting with the buckets up on the board. Assuming we ultimately recoup our receivables, the thought is most of the money stays in a local loan fund without a lot of the regulatory requirements that went with the old fund. And tentatively, we want to see $1.5 million in there. And we've got $1.5 million in cash right now. Second would be a revolving fund for the city's use to acquire, clear, fix up, sell blighted properties. Hopefully recoup most or all of that money so it goes back into the fund. And then some of it was also approved for direct spending, $200,000 pot for initiatives like the branding study, the branding effort that's going on right now, and to at least provide the seed money. We'll eventually transition it to the general fund for a new community development and city planner position, which I'm happy to say we just announced yesterday that we have filled.
And we
so
did
those
mention
dollars
that
are still
today,
out there.
So. And
It's
actually,
been an interesting history.
mention to her Elizabeth, right?
Yeah, our new person who will start on September 16th is Elizabeth Runge.
You were right.
Yeah, or Runge, I believe it's not quite as hard on the G. Runge. She has 26 years of experience in community development and planning, master's degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Iowa, has worked for the last little over a year and a half with Bay Lake Regional Planning as an economic development planner in charge of their regional brownfields program with EPA grant dollars that were awarded to the Regional Planning Commission. 11 years prior to that, she was with Ayers Associates, an engineering and planning consulting firm out of Ashwaubenon. Prior to that, with East Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. Prior to that, with an RPC, or Regional Planning Commission in Iowa. I think she brings a good skill set and was the unanimous pick of our 5-member interview team, which included myself, our city clerk, police chief, and our city council president, Patrick Gagnon, and vice president, Kurt Andrews. So
do us a big favor and put in a good word with her for us, because we would like to have her on Two Rivers Talks. And
we want her
we'll
out
let
in
her
the
get her
community.
feet wet and kind of hit the road running. But
She'll be here a day, 2 days.
Yeah,
a day or 2 days.
I'll go 3.
Then we'll have like a long list of questions.
Absolutely. Well, I've already told her, the week before you start, if you could make it down here, there's a hotel groundbreaking that we think is pretty cool.
That's right.
Your first week of employment on Thursday night, the 19th of September, is a workshop on the branding initiative. The civic brand folks over at the community house. She probably talked about that already. But I think it's a good time for a full-time professional to come on board in that position. We've got our struggles, but we've got a lot of good things going in this community, and a lot of them are just a block away. That harbor area, seeing the new hotel go up, the city's purchase of the former Egger site, some of the interest there. Continued efforts that we can't talk too much about yet, with working with Thermo Fisher. That property needs to be redeveloped, and where Two Rivers pivots. This community is ready to see some changes.
Absolutely.
Positive changes.
And And I'd like to jump back over to Paragon here for
Sure,
a second,
yeah.
because a lot of the things that I kind of wanted to bring up are based on some of the questions and comments from people in the community.
Mm.
So but basically, one of the things is that, well, and one thing that I had seen too is that back in 2014, in addition to the 750 from the city, the 250 from the county, the 1.15 mil that they had to foot the bill on in whatever way that they did. There was also 2 million that was earmarked by WEDEC, but that was contingent upon securing a loan
Yes.
for the 18
That
million.
that came on the back
M&E.
end, it was not on the
Right.
front end.
Okay,
like
but
the
that was
city.
more towards
It was,
the-
I
That
guess
was
I-
Wisconsin Economic Development Council?
Right,
Okay.
right.
that-
So that had been a possibility too.
Yeah.
My question, and this is where I'm going to play devil's advocate because I'm pretty passionate about this, is that for over 1.5 years, acquiring the estimated 18 million in M&E needed to begin production had still not been obtained. And Dan Wergen stated the key issue on the equipment comes down to what equipment and how much will we use. Devil's advocate right here, shouldn't they have known the answers to these questions back in 2014? I don't understand
I expect,
I'm not trying to put you
again,
on
I'm
the
not-
spot,
not here
but
to
it's
answer
kinda-
him. I know our committee over the years heard different explanations of where things were in the process. Once the end customer or customers involved weren't the same as the original, there were discussions about
Right.
different types of bottling, acquiring a used equipment line. Our committee heard different iterations of that, and I'm not saying any of them were less than true.
Right.
It's just, I think, truth, they were scrambling to try to make something work, and it
okay.
pretty
Well,
clear
and
hasn't
I-
happened.
I think this happens with a lot of business endeavors. Like if you're a leadership team, you may not, you may talk to your engineers about what's necessary for an operation, and then at the time when you come back to that issue and you say, okay, well, we need these things, we need to do this, this, and this, and your engineer suddenly says, oh, but you know what, you need these other things,
Right.
and then you need to get a whole other set of equipment, involved for it. So I could see how that could go sideways
Okay.
really easily as part of the like you've got it figured in your business plan. Okay, we know it's going to cost this to do this, but then suddenly you find out there's these other factors that are coming into the picture with the business.
You do your
Yeah.
best
I'm not-
at the front end.
I'm not trying to be an apologist for the guy because maybe they completely screwed up, but I don't know.
But who knows? But I always
Yeah.
just thought that was,
It's
to
a
me, it
little
was just
odd,
a little
yeah.
odd. But in all fairness, this was a huge undertaking. Absolutely huge. And it hadn't been done before, and there was going to be a lot of restructuring within that facility.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't look at it lightly.
It is amazing though, people sit back and say, well, what's wrong? That plant that was so productive, that produced so much payroll and benefit to not just Two Rivers, but this whole area, has just sat idle. And the past 5 years have come to kind of an ugly conclusion here, but even the 15, 16 years prior to that, with Paragon's departure, and it's not really for sale because
Right.
an investor is very happy getting a lease payment. It was just sitting there idle, and the option pretty much was, well, you can sublease it, but at the end of the lease term, you may have to negotiate totally different terms. So I can appreciate as you got closer to the end of that 20-year lease, it became more precarious for anyone looking at using it. And if you're someone that needs 300,000 square feet or so, you're not going to move it in a hurry if you run into a problem. So just a strange combination of some international corporate interests originally, some kind of creative financing, sitting empty, a new startup business proposed that had an element of risk, 2 public entities and a bank. I don't know how the bank ended up because they're not party to this, but that said, well, at least the public entities, we ought to be in fairly good shape. There's some risk here, but we're in first position on a pretty nice piece of property. That's 5 years ago.
Right.
And fast forward to the present, here we are.
Right.
But
And now we can start moving forward. But one of the things that I have a couple of things here that I just want to just kind of throw at you.
Yeah.
Is this a lightning round?
Yeah. This is the lightning round.
Quick answer.
Now, we know that there were some
Yes or
missed
no?
benchmarks, such as job creation. What were some of the other benchmarks or goals that were missed? I know that,
And understand, although 300 new jobs were talked about, the actual job creation criteria was much lower than that.
I think originally,
Ours was 37 and a half because it's $20,000 per job.
right,
The counties
yeah,
was,
37 and a half.
the counties was a little different because
25
they had
for
a
the
different
county.
ratio.
Right.
They had a $10,000 loan per job.
Right.
So we, I think you can appreciate having been on the committee, not at the time the loan was made, but
Right.
having been on the
Right.
committee since then, saved you there. Since the loan was made, we typically don't want to have someone overpromise. If $20,000 per job met criteria, it's great if you're promising 300, but why commit to 300? The fact is, we didn't see 37 and a half. The county didn't see
Right.
25. Employment as documented peaked at 3 and then
Right.
went to 0.
Right, yeah, and the thing is that, and this was back in December of 2017, Herald Times Reporter Streetwise Manitowoc reported that since 2016 job creation goals had not been met,
Yep.
both entities, which was the city and the county, amended the jobs provision to allow the company more time, but in
Yep.
recent weeks, Two Rivers officials moved to initiate collection action and require the loans be paid in full. In addition, the loan agreement required the company to stay current on taxes,
Yep.
or 3% in interest would default to 12%.
Yes.
And guess what? That's what happened back in September of
that's,
2017.
That's part of
So-
the accrued bill
Right.
that is owed. And understand the 12% applied from the time that default was formally called out
Right.
until the time of the foreclosure judgment. Since then, still not repaid since last October, but even as we've done I think it went in already this week, the city attorney's done a supplemental filing to get the amounts owed up to what is current. We're only able to have the face interest rate apply since the date of the foreclosure,
Right.
so that's 3%.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there was good faith in the beginning, and some people in the community just seem to think that we just blithely agreed to loaning $750,000. No, there was a lot of
It's
vetting
not that
done.
simple.
And it wasn't just us. The county they went through the same rigmarole. Where the 1.15.
We have an intercreditor agreement with the county that addresses in the event of a default, we have to notify each other before taking action. How does the amount outstanding get divvied up? And It's
Right.
pretty much based on our pro rata shares of the financing. And understand, I continue to debtors indicating that they still believe that they can get takeout financing, and if they do, you will hear my heels clicking together
Right.
from City Hall over here. That would be wonderful. But to date, it hasn't happened, and we need to be realists. We're sitting here in August. You got a building without a functioning heating system, a leaky
And I
roof,
wanted to talk about
and
that.
winter inevitably. This is Wisconsin. Winter will arrive. We hope it waits until December.
Yeah.
It doesn't always, but winter will arrive. The city's got a responsibility to be good stewards here, and we've tried our best. And at the end of the day, that's still 27 prime acres in the city, with a building, much of which I believe is salvageable, can still be put to good use. We've just got to do our darndest to
Right.
make that happen. I appreciate
Right.
the opportunity to talk about that. Are we through the lightning round, Jeff?
No.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
I didn't think we were.
Just getting warmed up.
And Mr. Roger Rusov just showed up for our next segment,
It's nice
just
that
sit
they make you
back,
wear a bell.
relax.
Roger.
Yeah,
Let's be
really.
like that cat.
With the most annoying bell ever.
I thought it was someone wanting to buy the Paragon.
Yeah.
It's only Roger.
It's only Roger,
Yeah, and an angel got its wings. Anyway, but a couple of things I just wanted to mention was utility costs to the city, legal fees to the city,
Yep.
repair costs.
Yeah, we haven't done
You
much
know.
in the way of repairs because again, we
Well,
don't
we
control
haven't been
the
in there, and we
building. Right.
haven't had an
Yep.
opportunity.
There's $100 bill for cleaning the sidewalks once.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, and
But you
recently,
know,
even mowing the lawns.
And mowing
outside.
the grass
Yeah.
because it had gotten terrible. We've even had our contractor, as we do downtown, engage in seagull control. A few years ago
Right.
in the summer, there were 1,100 seagull nests
Wow.
on that gravel ballasted
I-
roof. Not to make light of anything. They loved it. They had a great nesting spot.
they did.
The diner was just a block away at Lake Michigan. And so it's even come down to gull control on the roof.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, but that is something that, and that's one thing that I hope that all parties realize is that this $750,000, it isn't money that was just haphazardly loaned out by a city government. That is monies belonging to over 11,000 people.
Right.
And I think it's very important to remember that and to remember that this has affected all of us one way or another. But back taxes, they're how many years behind?
3, it will now be 4 with
Okay.
in August, the delinquent taxes went to
Now-
the kind of, now see the way that works, just kind of a local government 101. In Wisconsin, county government ultimately makes the other units whole when we settle up taxes. Like last December's tax bills, final installment due date has come and gone. In August, the city will, which gets to collect all the taxes, city, school, county, LTC, the city will advise the county of the amount of delinquent taxes we need to turn over to them. The county then makes the other taxing units whole for that revenue. The county is also the level of government, though, that's vested under state law with the ability to do a tax foreclosure or an in rem foreclosure.
Right.
Once a property is fully 3 years in arrears, the county can, they don't always, but they can pursue what's called in rem foreclosure,
Right.
take the property for back taxes. Again, erase all other liens and be able to resell it, hopefully recoup.
That scared the
taxpayers'
hell out of me,
interest.
to be quite honest
Yeah.
with you.
And the county of Manitowoc has been very good. They allowed the city of Two Rivers last summer to just make the one delinquent installment that made it 3 years past
Right.
due. And right now, things are riding forward, but the county will be paid. They have every right to be paid
Right.
under state law, and they have the ultimate authority, the
Right,
ultimate enforcement mechanism. They have agreed to forego that action while they cooperate with the city on this, and we greatly appreciate that.
right, oh,
Yeah.
absolutely, because I mean, we could have lost our shirt,
Yeah.
big
And in
time,
the meantime,
which
it
I
is-
never realized.
yeah, it's accruing interest at 1% a month, which is probably
That's-
better than most governmental units investment portfolios.
Right.
A little over 12% a year.
Um,
But yeah, yeah, and I don't, again, if I show any levity, it's not a laughing matter, it's serious. I believe it's been pursued seriously. The decision, as you pointed out, staff provides input. We have a citizen committee that city council has delegated authority to, with 2 council members on it.
Right.
That views its responsibilities very seriously. Our track record is we've been good stewards for that money over the years. That's why we're nervous about the state taking it back as well, because we want to use it here in Two Rivers. And this is a big one, and a big one that has not turned out the way anybody wanted. And I'm sure
No.
not the way the borrowers wanted either, because
No.
you don't really want to read in the paper about your transgressions or your defaults. But that's where we are, and as a community, we've got to move forward on this. And
Right.
like you pointed out early on, it would have been great if somebody with a big checkbook had been at the foreclosure sale, the sheriff's sale, to outbid the city and the county, because we had obviously a joint approach to this. That didn't happen. So our next hope is that the judgment is awarded, we can get that property marketed, and
Right.
Seek to recover the investment. And
Well-
the city, again, I won't speak for the county, but the city does reserve all rights to pursue Paragon Partners LLC and the private individuals that were the co-makers of the loan.
Right,
And there's certainly a firm commitment to do that. I think I can speak for the committee
right,
and the city council on that one.
yeah, and, you know, one thing that, well, a couple things, but, you know, what is salvageable? We're not really gonna know that until we get in there today and we can do a walkthrough and see just, you know, cause there were openings in the roof.
Yes.
and which, snow
Some of the
Canyon.
older parts of the,
Yeah.
of the building, you could see the sky.
Right,
Yeah.
which, you know, and damage follows.
Yeah.
So,
City crews have had to respond the last 2 winters when a sprinkler system risers froze and burst in the older
Right.
parts of the building.
well, wasn't it a couple of inches of water that some of these, like forklifts were having to drive through?
I don't know, I've never been in one of the forklifts moving around, but.
Or something
that
was
may be
driving
the case.
through it.
Yeah, I mean, there are different
But-
parties that have been in and out of the
Right.
building with leasing space for warehousing and that. Again, even though
Yeah.
the city's paying the heating bills, paying the utility bills, mowing the grass, we still don't have legal control over the property.
Right,
That can only come after a court with a word, if
Right.
they do.
but we had to make sure that we were good
You're-
stewards and.
Yeah, you don't wanna see the asset laid waste any more
Right.
than you can avoid.
Right, and
So that's where we are.
so. and-
Stay tuned, it would sure be great to be in a position where it could be listed and, again, return to a productive use.
Right. Well, I'm excited to be able to go do a walkthrough, just see exactly where we're at, because you know that there's gonna have to be repair work that's done before we can really market it to somebody.
Mhm.
You know, you can't, how could you possibly really market something, you know, or a property like that, and there's, you know, the roof needs repair, or, you know, the heating system
Or-
is lacking.
Or you have a buyer who at least comes in, having done their due diligence and knowing full well what needs to be done.
Right, so at least we can have
If
that.
there's a buyer, and I've consistently said this to the current owners, if there's a buyer out there, there are programs that may be appropriate, but you've gotta have a for real business.
Right.
You've gotta have a serious commitment to job creation and private investment. All the things where at least the proposed project that got us to this point fell down.
Right.
So,
And just one last thing too, and this was kind of like our Mythbusters portion of it. There had been a rumor that had been going around that part of the problem that bottling plant never was able to get up and running was the fact that there wasn't a adequate water supply.
No, not true. I can tell you there was a concern with some of the volume projections of the amount of water that would be needed. That caused, first of all, the city to go to Manitowoc Public Utilities, where we don't have a robust connection to them, but we do have an interconnect at Woodland Drive, and we did reach an agreement in the event the city of Two Rivers needed to purchase additional quantities from MPU, we could do so. We also got some preliminary numbers together as to at what volume level we would need more than could be delivered from our plant, given
And
its
our
current
output
capacity.
is really good.
And from Manitowoc, at least given the pipes that are there.
Right,
And we did have a concern, and we communicated that to the owners when they were still actively talking about bottling plant, that we had a constraint with our Lake Michigan intake, and you're aware of that, where a buildup of debris in
Right.
the intake pipe that's been in the bottom of the lake since 1924 was causing our plant to not be able to produce water at our rated capacity. That was addressed last summer
Right.
with the cleaning of the lake intake, a major investment by the council, by the ratepayers ultimately.
right,
But that totally alleviated that. We'd be a great place for a bottling plant. We have high quality water, we have the ability to produce it in large volumes, and I know every water bill payer in the city would rejoice if there was
Absolutely.
somebody there making good use of this clean, abundant resource
right.
we've never, in recent years, I think you'd have to go back to the years Mura was producing in the community. We've never had real big water users. Hamilton wasn't a big water user.
Right.
Eggers is not a big water user. They don't use processed water. They don't ship it out in cans like Lakeside Food does from food processing. They don't use it in massive quantities like Budweiser, now Breeze does in Manitowoc. All of
Another
that
reason to
said-
have breweries here.
That's right.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even like businesses that you wouldn't necessarily think of, as needing a lot of water, but something like a data center.
I was
Sure.
gonna say, that
Everything
requires,
Cooling.
Yeah. Which I think this would be an awesome place for
Right.
something like that.
And we've heard from folks that have done, analysis of our water that it is very high quality. The ultrafiltration membrane system is state of the art. It's housed in old buildings, but it's state of the art
Right.
technology. So let's hope that we get together for one of these shows, maybe a year or so out, and have something happy to report as an outcome of this. But at least this sheriff's sale that took place last week is a pretty darn significant marker in the process. None of us want to be at this point, but at least it could be an inflection point where things can proceed for the better.
Good. And I'm glad that we are at this juncture.
And if I go back to City Hall and there's a check from the current borrowers paying us off in full.
Wow, would you call us like right away?
I will rejoice and call you. But that's where we are today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have any more questions for Greg?
No, this is great. Thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
and
Thanks for what you guys are
sharing.
doing here. It's good for the community.
Well, we're excited to get the news out and to do a little myth busting at the same time.
Yeah.
And if you have thoughts or ideas or questions about the sale of the Paragon Building, drop them down in the comments for us below.
Yes.
We'd love to hear from you. Obviously, we're not official answers for that, but we can always
We can help
talk to a guy
direct
we
them.
know. Right?
Yeah. So, and definitely we would love for you to be back
We'll be
on.
back.
And I know we got some exciting things happening in the city
Yep.
that are good, that are coming up fairly soon. And I'd like to get you on a little bit more regularly, and we can talk about some of the happy, wonderful things that are happening here. Because from what we've seen in a year's time of doing this program, is that Two Rivers is turning a corner, or has turned a corner, very significantly.
A lot of great entrepreneurial activity,
Right.
success stories with small business.
We're on a journey here,
Yeah,
and it's a good one.
There's a lot
Right.
of, lot of good
Yeah.
green sprouts coming up,
Mhm.
and you guys are part of it. So thank you for giving voice where traditional media in a lot of ways has fallen by the wayside in getting the word out to the community.
Have you
I'll
noticed-
reserve judgment until I see how this ends.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Maybe I'll retract that. But
No, you will
it's
be
appreciated.
happy, let me
good.
tell
Well,
you.
we're as non-traditional as it gets. So.
Yeah. Well, one thing I did want to say too is that within the past year, when we first started off, as far as I was concerned, our tagline was, we talk about Two Rivers because nobody else will. And I have noticed that like in the HTR, there's more and more mention of
It's
Two Rivers.
changing, right?
It really is changing, and I'm not saying it's because of us, but I think it's the efforts of so many different people in this community and some of the wonderful things that are happening.
And celebrating our own unique identity as a community.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and for that, if we had something to do with that, far out. I'm very, very happy. But we've got the groundbreaking for the cobblestone, such fantastic things. A year ago, who'd have thought?
Yep. There's other interest in commercial investment
It's
that's
fantastic.
positive. And again, a topic for another day, but we all lived through the Hamilton closure, which was a tough chapter for this community. But that was also a train wreck that most people could see coming probably 20 years out. I always say it was like being in a long-term dysfunctional relationship with your largest employer. Some night we know we're going to come home and they're going to be gone. And they did ultimately leave. But it was after a lot of grinding years where, contract would come up, well, you better give on this, you better give on that, we're
Right.
out of here. Clearly, utter lack of reinvestment in the buildings and the facilities. So that was tough. Don't want to minimize that for a minute. It hurt a lot of people. By the same token, for new shoots to come up,
Right.
that almost had to happen because it hung like a low dark cloud over this community for a long time, and especially with a company in which there was historically so much pride, real devotion.
Right.
My grandpa worked there, my great grandpa, but for the last 30 years or so, when it was absentee corporate ownership, it was unrequited love, and the community
Right.
didn't have the respect of that company. But a lot of the things that are happening, whether it's BizStarts or the branding effort now, if we remember Hamilton, Paragon, Miro, you name the local companies that became big companies that built this community and sadly left, each and every one of them began with an entrepreneur, somebody with a bright
right.
idea, ambition, access to capital, who built it here. Now, it's not that easy an environment anymore anywhere, I don't think, for entrepreneurs to get their feet under them. But if we can still be that sort of place where sparks of ingenuity can become roaring fires
Right.
of economic activity, it's a bad analogy. But that's the message we need to convey. This is still a place where bright, ambitious people
That's
can
right.
get things done.
Yeah,
And a lot of
well
that's rekindling entrepreneurial spirit.
And we're really trying to do that, and I think that, I would say that, smaller communities like Two Rivers are a great place to.
It's
to put
affordable,
businesses.
it's
Yeah.
safe, it's low hassle. How was your commute in, you know?
Right.
It's drop dead gorgeous, and a
Right.
community with a high quality of life, and that isn't just squishy talk for, we'll raise your taxes. It's a community where you can jump on your bike on the bike trail, or you can in 5 minutes be out in the middle of the state forest. Your kids
Absolutely.
can still play out in the yard during the day. You know,
Right.
if you have a medical emergency, you've got a fire department that'll be there within 4 minutes, and they won't just whisk you to the hospital. You'll be under expert care from the moment they
That's
pick
right.
you up. There are a lot of great people that have deep roots here. There are a lot of people too that are here by choice, that have come here with their eyes wide open and said, we like what we see. This is a good place to be. It's a place where you can engage, and they're making things happen,
That's
and
right.
will continue to. Thanks.
Great. Thank you again.
That's the sermonette.
We'll look forward
Yeah,
to seeing
happy
you here
Thursday,
again
guys.
soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill.